Philly Coco presents Side Projects Spotlight, episode 72. This is a developer's journey to making cool stuff. I'm Kotaro. And I'm Steve. And I'm Aaron. And we are Philly Coco, a Philadelphia-based Coco Heads community focused on Apple development that primarily, but not exclusively, means iOS, Mac, tvOS, watchOS, and visionOS development. Philly Coco's true desire is to take you higher on your own developer journey. Ooh. All right, well, it hasn't been obvious through the intro. I was pretending I was Steve and Aaron. Steve and Aaron, for this podcast, fortunately could not make it. So it is going to be a solo podcast today with me as your driver. So hopefully you can buckle up and enjoy the ride. Today's topic will be about design systems. And that's kind of an interesting thing. I don't think we've really talked about it much at all on this podcast. And I kind of wanted to discuss about it just sort of like a broad detail. We might actually go back and discuss about it in more detail in future podcasts. But I think I kind of wanted to think of it in the context of particularly around mobile. So I guess the first point about it is, what is a design system? And I guess one of the things that I would probably lean on is a Figma file, a Figma website that actually does a decent job of sort of explaining it, but you can kind of think of it like a set of building blocks and standards for which to keep your look and feel of your product, aka app, or website, depending on how you approach this. It's kind of like a blueprint, offers sort of like a unified, for lack of a better word, language and sort of framework for which all the teams, whether it be design and development team, can kind of work through and kind of stay on the sort of same page of how an app is sort of laid out and styled. Some of the things that makes it interesting. So I think you can kind of look at it as like, if you want to keep a level of consistency throughout all your products, right? So let's say you have a website, you have an app, maybe you're doing a TV, Apple TV app as well. You probably want to make sure that they all have the same rounded corners, they have the same typography, they have the same brand colors, they have the same light mode, dark mode if you have it. They have the same, I'm not sure if I said typography already, but yeah, basically they have, and then the same weights and configurations for each of those weights for the typographies, whether it be body, display types, title types, etc. Maybe even include accessibility, of course, if there are things you can keep as a consistent level. I'm not particularly familiar with how accessibility works within a design system, but so I'll hold off on that until I've done better research around it. The other thing you can kind of look at from a sort of, so that's sort of the basics. I think some of the components you can kind of start off with are sort of your typical components. Foundationally speaking, we're talking about, say, color, whether, particularly around your brand colors, your sizing. So you can think of it like the grid system. That's very popular on the website, maybe not as popular on mobile, but it's relatively straightforward to implement to keep consistent. Let's say your obviously your fonts and your even animations, if you wanted to. That's sort of more of a deeper dive, I would think. And again, the key reason for wanting to do that is to make sure, again, across all your products, you're keeping a sort of consistent look and feel of the app. So again, sort of like if you were building an app that's more of a, something that's more platform specific. So like you have an Android version, an iOS version, a web version, maybe an Apple TV version, maybe a visionOS version, even in watchOS. I think there are some elements you can probably take with it, particularly around the colors and the fonts. You can all sort of apply that in a variety. You can sort of set that in a way, and it's kind of interesting because, in a sense, if you want to do it relatively successfully, for which all your key stakeholders can kind of get on board, there's a lot of like setup that you have to do. You kind of have to lay out the tracks cleanly, um, and create the pipeline. You probably want to create the pipeline earlier rather than later, because there are a tendency for designers, particularly, to make a lot of changes on the fly, and these changes like can be dramatic in terms of how they lay things out. So a lot of times you would sort of expect these design um, systems to sort of be constructed in something like Figma to start, right? Just to lay out the sort of language, to lay out all the fonts and all the colors, and then sort of build up the wireframes that way. I mean, that's part of how you can think of those design systems, of where they would be sort of sketched out and defined. On the iOS side of things, I think that makes it a little bit tougher, because you were kind of used to sort of controlling the whole, bespoke experience. On the app side, I think that's kind of our domain of sort of like, okay, it's fine. You want these rounded corners and these, iconographies and stuff. We can do that locally. But I can kind of see a scenario where maybe you would want to sort of separate that level of concern in a package, right? So maybe you do something as a local package or even a remote package. And then if you add a remote package, right, that stores all the design. Maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself. One thing I want to sort of emphasize is this idea about tokens. And tokens kind of help sort of create this way for designers to sort of say, okay, for this button, you have these particular features, whether it be the padding, the background color, the font size and style for this particular type of button. And then for this particular type of button, maybe the background will be transparent. And you would have these sort of different sets of tokens for all these sort of scenarios, whether it be color, corner radius is a generic example, spacing, maybe a set of tokens of spacing of different dimensions and sizes of spacing, font types and font names and sizing. You would want to have that in a token, and even different types of animations, and whether it be spring, a bouncy, maybe you want to have a particular type of ease in and ease out kind of animation, to sort of like be consistent with the brand. You don't want maybe something too bouncy, so maybe you have something that is like pseudo bouncy, but within the confines of like a much more corporate style of like of interaction or app animations. You don't want the thing to be so expressive that it gets outside of the brand's um, identity, for lack of a better word. And again, part of the thing that is what's supposed to make this great, this design system, is that it provides consistency again throughout the product. In theory, it should also make things faster, make it faster for you to iterate and change, due to whatever market conditions. Maybe you want to do, say, an app that is a little, you want to change all the rounded corners of a view by like, maybe 3 points or something. You don't want to have to do it at all these places at once. That's sprinkled all over your app. You can do it in, you can change one token that'll update all the views and save you time. And the designers can have some control, which is kind of where a lot of this is about, where you can kind of sort of you can kind of like change the font, right? If you want the font to have to be, yeah, let's say a great example would be Verizon, right? Verizon just recently changed their brand to something that's a little more playful, a little more fun, and a little more bold, in terms of the fonts and the thickness and all that. I mean, if you were to build uh, if you had a design system, you would just need to change that font, and it would just bleed out to all the other platforms that you are deployed to. So in this case, with Verizon, can just, assuming that they had a design system, they would just change it in one place in the token, and that would kind of like trickle down to the website, to the apps, and whatever other products they might have. I'm not sure if they have a Apple TV product or or anything like that, but you get the point. Then it's also an interesting way if you were to do sort of like white label apps, right? So maybe you can create different design tokens for different apps, right? So maybe you have you have an app that that has the basic layout that most apps would have, and then you just need to change the icon, the app, the app logo, the backgrounds in one place. You can do that, and that will change, and then you could just deploy that white label app as if it was a different app. So it's possible to do, and I think I've seen it done in a relatively straightforward way, but it does take a significant amount of setup. So in the case of, say, something like in an app development world, if, for example, if we're strictly staying within an iOS app, right, and you just have that design system in the iOS app, you could technically put it in a package. You can set up your asset folder to handle all the colors and any asset specific stuff, the app logo, the backgrounds, any background assets, any I don't know if fonts would be one of those things that you can add, but you certainly add it as a resource, a part of the resource folder. If you were to all your tokens can be sort of constructed within using Structs or Enums to sort of organize all your tokens. And should you decide to come up with a more remote way of updating those things through an API or some kind of way to construct your tokens, you can like automatically construct your tokens that way. You could possibly that could be easily sort of translated to JavaScript, from JavaScript to SwiftUI, and then construct your package that way. You can also do something which is interesting with icons. I only recently just sort of read up on SF symbols and how you would create custom SF symbols, and you would probably ask, why would I want to do that? And I think the one thing you might consider using it for is to take advantage of some of the animation tricks you can do if you configure it right. And so designers would have to take the SF symbols template. Usually what you would do is export one SF symbol and then open it up. I forgot which tool. I think it was the SF symbol tool, and then tweak and change any of the sort of icons within that set to your icon, and then change it to have the opacities, and you can sort of test different types of opacities and layers of opacities in that, which is pretty cool, because then what happens is you can bring it in as a separate set, and it kind of merges in with your SF symbol set, but it acts as a part of the whole system that you can access through, and then you can sort of use SF symbols to sort of be you can use your icons as sort of a subset of the full SF symbol set, which I thought was kind of nice. And I mean, I'm sure there's certain drawbacks because you're sort of stuck in that. Yeah, this is assuming that this is just an iOS specific only solution. I can't speak to how you would do it in Android. Granted, I assume that there's some similar facsimile, but it would require some coordination on that part, unless you decide to just go full cross native and cross platform and do something like Flutter or React Native, and then that's its own set of solutions that you have to figure out. Some drawbacks. There are a few. I think there's a lot of complexity about deciding on these token names and figuring out which are relevant and which are not for each platform. The thing about something like an iOS platform is that we don't have focus states. We have hover states, But we don't necessarily need or have a focus engine unless you use Apple TV, right? So, you know, having a situation where maybe you would create a button specific around focus state is one of those things where, you have to sort of figure out how those tokens sort of translate, or do you even need them to translate over for a mobile platform? The other thing is that, and so it's kind of this weird, like, weird feeling of like, oh, uh, this is almost like an inheritance all over again in some bizarro way. The other thing is it can get overly it requires a lot of coordination between all parties, if assuming that you're working in a team or a large team, right? Because I don't think design systems is something that you use unless you're scaled pretty high in terms of like developer count. So if you have your and designer counts, I'm sorry, design and developers and product owners, right? So like there's this whole track of people who are building the tokens, the design language, the UI components, and then the app itself, or the product itself. And if the coordination is not, if the tracks aren't properly laid out, it becomes a problem later on, and it becomes even a bigger problem when the um, one doesn't know what the other one is doing. So there's a tremendous amount of coordination to be figured out with that. Um, Otherwise, you ruffle a lot of feathers. And so I think that some, and I'm not entirely sure how you handle that, because a lot of times it does feel a lot of this whole, like, it's another version of chasing a unicorn, of like of cross platform. It'll look the same everywhere, and you know doesn't but then you always make these conditionals for these one or two or three or four, or 1,000 different scenarios, and eventually sort of you have to be careful about like making those like hard cuts about saying, okay, you know in this case we do not um rely on the design system for this, right? And so I think the other that also makes it tough, if once you've got everything set up to make significant changes. One of the fun things about being a designer, UX designer, UI UX designer, is you can mix and match, you can change, you can move things around, you can do all sorts of fun little experiments, and to get sort of the sort of layout and the 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 UI that you want. But that in a particularly like in a enterprise app or production environment, like that doesn't fly. They're on strict schedules and tight deadlines, and they have to produce something in a more like organized fashion. And I think sometimes we get caught in the middle of trying to allow for these opportunities to build, and inevitably the design system fails to address this crazy scenario of or it just doesn't get communicated downstream. So what was once acceptable to and communicated to the production development team, the it it's suddenly changed, and they're like, oh, wait a minute, why are these fonts so different, or why are these rounded corners changed, and why are our UI tests failing, or snapshots are failing? Well, uh, that's why. Right? Like so it's it has that kind of like weird chasing the unicorn smell. And you know and I think sometimes that is I don't know, I'm having very sort of strong feelings about whenever i I have those um chasing the unicorn smells. I always sort of like wince my eyes about it. because it's not necessarily respecting the platforms that they're on. And I know I've harped on this before, and I know it's not something that, like, if you are a if you are a product owner, right, you care about sort of the overall brand vision and sort of like brand design, for lack of a better word. It just like that's like, look, these corners are round and these fonts are going to be looking like this and the spacing is going to look just like this. That's what we are, right? Like, that makes sense. I get it. But it leaves for so little, um, it leaves for such a little opportunity to really like push the boundaries of like the interactions. So I end up having to sort of play in between those lines. And a lot of it is around the animation interactions. And I think that's sort of like how I get around like the rigidness of design systems in a way, in my own personal way, how I can keep it playful. And again, that's just me just wanting to play as a developer, like giving it the nice little nuance that it deserves. But yeah, that's kind of like where I feel like I'm at the moment with design systems and sort of my opinions about. But I think I want to stop here. I kind of want to get some feedback from the real Aaron and Steve in the next podcast, just as a follow up, just to see what their opinions are about this. But until then, that's all we have for today. You can learn more about Philly Cocoa at phillycocoa.org. There you'll find links to our Slack group, meetup schedule, and contact info. If you're feeling generous, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever your podcast platform of choice is, and share us with all your developer friends. And one more thing. Again, we are doing a non-sponsored promotion for Azam Sharp. He's a good friend of ours, Ahmed Azam. AzamSharp.school. He is hosting quite a few workshops scheduled for the next 2 months. One of them is machine learning with iOS using CreateML on August 17th. Another one is intro to server-side Swift using Vapor. That looks nice. The other one is Swift Data on September 28th. And another one, it's going even further. Intro to testing in iOS using Swift, October 12th. And one more, Intro to Supabase for iOS developers on October 26th. Okay, that's it. But if you're interested in any live workshops with Azam, you can go to AzamSharp.school. And till next time, good luck with your own developer journey. We will cheer for you always. I'm Kotaro. And I'm Steve. And I'm Aaron.